Welcome to the November Java Cafe Global Conversation. Java Cafes are put on by GLUNA, the Greater Lansing United Nations Association. My name is Lisa Berg, and I'm a GLUNA board member and the Vice President of Programming. The mission of GLUNA is to inspire and mobilize the community to support the mission and work of the UN and its agencies through education and advocacy. Our Java Cafes are a way to help fulfill that mission through presenters who provide us with information which is followed by a conversation about what we learned. Please note that this Java Cafe is being recorded and will be available on our website, gluna.org, within a few days. This evening's presentation, Could We Enhance Global Security Through Gender Equality, will discuss the effects of including women in the male-dominated security sector. In a few minutes, I'll introduce Ron Risden. Ron will give us an introduction to our topic, and then we'll introduce our speaker, Julia Coleman, whom we're very excited to have joining us from New York this evening. After Juliet's presentation, we will have time for question and answer. You can either enter your questions at that point into the chat, or you can raise your hand to be called on for a question. At the end of the evening, we will provide information about how you can find out more about the UN Women's 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, which begins on November 25th. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ron Risden. Ron joined the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations in 1993, serving as a senior administrative officer and head of office in high-profile and frequently hazardous assignments, including Somalia, Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Sudan. Although officially retired from full-time work at the UN, Ron continues with special assignments, most recently in East Timor, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sudan. He has published 2 books on peacekeeping, with a draft of a 3rd book just completed. Ron is active in the United Nations Association, belonging to our chapter here in the US and another chapter in the UK, where he lectures and researches peacekeeping and refugee issues. Thanks for being with us tonight, Ron.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a real pleasure and honor. Let me get this lights. That's bad. Okay. To introduce tonight's topic and speaker. Let me start by introducing the topic a bit, just very briefly, by quoting from a recent article from the UN Peacekeeping website. It states rather clearly, it is well known that violent conflict disproportionately affects women and girls and intensifies pre-existing gender inequalities and discrimination. Women are also active agents of peace in armed conflict, yet their role as key players and change agents of peace has been largely unrecognized. Accordingly, and integrating the different understanding experiences, acknowledging and integrating the different understanding, experiences, and capabilities of women into all aspects of UN peacekeeping operations is essential for the success. And I would add it's essential for success of security in general. Based on my own experience and assignments as a peacekeeper, I saw this fact in operation daily. Our uniformed peacekeepers were, all of us, in effect, were all male. And from a distance, other than the blue helmets, the UN helmets and the blue vests that we wore, we probably did not appear that much different from the other male-dominated forces that were fighting each other in the situations where we found ourselves. Not very inviting, especially to the women and children caught in such circumstances. In my books, I relate two situations where just the mere presence of females in positions of authority contributed greatly. The first was in Afghanistan, where a female civil affairs officer was able to very quickly set up a successful co-op of women in one of the villages to help them begin earning money. And the second is in Sudan, a bit more dramatic, where a female police officer who was part of the peacekeeping operation was instrumental in getting a pregnant woman who was wrongly accused of infidelity by her husband released from a primitive cell where she was also chained to a tree during the day and returned to her family and her village. And I might add, all charges were dropped. So could male peacekeepers have done these things? Of course they could. But two very pragmatic things strike me. First, it is so much easier and faster when 60 to 70% of the population in a peacekeeping environment can largely mitigate the gender issue by relating to another female. Second, these women were willing to fight so hard to get non-military, read non-male issues taken seriously and given serious consideration within our organization. In short, many of us have realized for some time that gender balance is critical to peacekeeping, that is to say, to security in general. Accordingly, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 was passed in October of 2000 to recognize the disproportionate and unique impact of armed conflict on women and girls. And it calls for substantial increases in the number of females in all positions in peacekeeping operations. To date, we have seen progress in these areas, but it is uneven, it is still slow. And just quickly to tie that into the Sustainable Development Goals, number 5 has to do with gender balance, and number 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. So it is definitely part of a larger tied in approach. Now, as to the speaker, it is a real honor to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Julia Coleman. Dr. Coleman has long been active in gender and social issues, and after her completing her doctorate at University of East Anglia in the UK, she was founder of an organization to help address this issue. Set up in 2015, Security Women, which she founded, is an advocacy organization for the inclusion of more women in security sector institutions, including military and police in countries throughout the world. The website for Security Women goes on to say, the vital area of security cannot be run along gender segregation lines. Women should be equal partners in the protection and security of civilians in all areas, as well as being proactive participants in matters of conflict resolution and peace building. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Coleman and turn it over to her.
Thank you very much indeed, Ron. And thank you for sharing your amazing experiences. I will actually touch the things you've mentioned, talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and also Security Council Resolution 1325. I will touch upon those. But before I do, let me share my, whoops, wrong one. There we go. Share my screen. Oops. Okay, so could we enhance global security through gender equality? Well, all my work with Security Women is based upon this, that the importance of gender equality. And basically, security can be so much better if women are treated as equal partners within the security sector. And yes, I talk about military, armed forces and policing, but peacekeeping, so important. And of course, to have peacekeepers who are, okay, they could be civilian peacekeepers, but to be part of the military force or the police contingent, they would have to be police officers or army personnel in their own countries. So we need to look at the different countries as to how we can increase the numbers. And I can assure you that women are not part of security in any country of the world in any great numbers. I wanted to just talk a little bit about why, before we move on, gender equality is so important. You have to look at the business world, how women have made a difference there and how successful businesses are that actually do include women. And I just simply put, where women are empowered, a safer, more stable and peaceful society for everyone is enabled. I just also wanted to quote Secretary General Guterres, who said just recently in his report on women, peace and security, that gender equality is a question of power. But power will not redistribute itself equally in a male-dominated world. How true. It is not easy. Lisa talked about 16 days of activism, and we're coming up to the UN Day for the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls on the 25th of November, as mentioned. And I just wanted to say that violence against women and girls is very much a visible sign of gender inequality. So the correlation between gender equality and security, well, we're looking here at the importance of reducing violence and conflict. Professor Valerie Hudson, who's at Texas A&M University, she wrote a book called Sex and World Peace in 2012, I think it was. Basically what she said, her message was that where a country had greater gender equality, there was less likelihood of conflict. And the converse to that, where there was more gender inequality, there was more likelihood of conflict. Just wondering if I can. Okay. And I just wanted to, on my slide, you can see Professor Vesna Pusic. She was a candidate for UN Secretary General, but I do like her message, and I'll just read this. The role of women in society is not just a human rights issue. In fact, it is a peace and security issue of the first order. Surely it is no coincidence that the most peaceful and democratic societies are those where women participate fully in all aspects of society, including public life. And conversely, that the most violent and tyrannical places on our planet are those where women have the fewest rights. And I have to say that what comes to mind is what happened in Afghanistan over the summer, and which was really quite horrific. And the main losers in the situation there are women and girls. Now, just a little bit about my organisation, Security Women. As I mentioned, it started in 2015. I had just completed my PhD, which I completed in Botswana, looking at social relations and gender relations. And I thought, what would make a difference? And although I don't have a security background, I thought that security is almost the last male bastion that needs to change for there to be more equality in the world and more peace in the world. So Security Women, as one said, advocates for more women in the security sector globally. So it's not just in one country, but we're looking across the world. It's quite a controversial point of view. A lot of women's organizations do not like to think about security, mainly because military and militarization they see as being very, very damaging. And of course it is. There is the worry that the world is becoming more militarized and more money is being spent on military and weapons. But what I would say to that in terms of if we can actually change the gender balance within the security sector, then we might actually get some different views coming through. And certainly the UN was very supportive. I was working at the time with UN Women and also DPO, the Department of Peace Operations. And so, as you see, the premise is that women are needed to facilitate better security, which is what I've said already. So we got UK charitable status in 2016. We also applied to be a non-profit in the US. And that was that went through in 2018. And we don't just advocate through having events and through myself and my colleagues talking at events like this, but we also carry out research of our own. And at the moment, we've got a research project going on, which is looking at young people's attitudes to the armed forces in the UK. And we're looking at cadet units within the UK. So women as security professionals. So as I say there, they've been largely invisible. I think the one thing is that men are superior physically, and that has been a driving force going back to the Stone Age. As they say, there are very polarizing attitudes. Men are protectors, and they protect women and children and the family, but it's only a short step to see women as victims. And security, very male dominated, estimated to be 97% male dominated across the world. And how did women actually enter into these professions? Well, as I say there, it was very haphazard, either because they were needed because men weren't around, or else it was to deal with the women's issues. And as I said, they're still very, very underrepresented. Now, I just wanted to emphasize how important it is, how important the security is to all of our well-being. And it is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 3, that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. It was mentioned by one about the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, Goal 5 and Goal 16. And I would say particularly Goal 16, which is promoting peaceful and inclusive societies. One of the indicators, 16.1, talks about the percentage of women and men who report feeling safe walking alone at night in their area where they live. And this is run by Gallup. And I have to say, I wanted at the time why could we not actually have a subsequent question that asked if women were actually more involved in the security, would actually women feel safer walking alone if they knew that there was that presence? There could have been a whole range of different questions asked around it. But Gallup apparently charged an awful lot of money to actually ask the question. The last point in this slide is about rule of law. If you think of any country that's suffering through conflict, might be through lack of security around drugs, crime, it is critical that countries actually tackle that and have a proper law and order, because there can be no development without security. And thinking about fundamental human well-being, not feeling safe in your own neighborhood is, or even in your own home, is, well, that's just a basis of living. And the other aspect of security is the fact that conflict has changed so enormously. And it's not just through new technology. But it always used to be that you had an enemy, and it was a very dualistic approach to warfare. But now it's not as simple as that. It's generally very messy. Think about the conflict in Syria and what happened there, and all the different factions. Of course, any conflict is devastating to development. Without peace, you can't have development. The other aspect is that we're all very interconnected now, and social media plays a big part in how conflict develops. And then there are no boundaries. Global terrorism, there are no boundaries really. And that's why we need countries to work together and thank goodness for the United Nations. I mentioned about technology. In terms of warfare, it is extraordinary. Robots obviously being used, drones obviously can make it safer for peacekeepers and for if you have a fighting faction. But I suppose for women, it actually means that physicality is not so important, and therefore that isn't an argument to say no, women can't be part of security. I would say that we need to have an increasing reliance on defence intelligence to keep us safe, and cybersecurity is obviously is very important because of the cyber threats that we all well, every day we're living through threats that are becoming more and more obvious. And also, I just wanted to mention about the broad role for military and for police in any country. I think through this COVID pandemic, we've actually seen how our military, certainly in the UK, I can talk about, has helped enormously. At times of crisis, they are there on hand to help out. And in the UK, they help build hospitals, run testing centres, so many different things. So why do we need women? Well, there are different views on this. In South Africa, there's very much a view that since apartheid, it's all about the equality of people. And because women make up 50% of the population, then they should have the same opportunities as men. In the UK, it's very much from the point of view of the institution should reflect the society that it actually represents in terms of race, gender, etc. And there's obviously the gender claim, the difference claim, that women bring something to the table that is not there when it's just all men. And I find myself slipping into essentialism here, where we say, oh, women are like that, and generalizing about their skills. But I think one has to focus on the combination. It's the diversity of thought and experience that can bring the difference. And the last point, that women are not necessarily more peace-loving. Absolutely. Women can actually be the worst barriers to change. So when did women actually join the military? Well, they've got a list of different countries, 1985, Norway and Israel. And in fact, Norway, they introduced conscription for women. When was it? About 4 years ago, I think, something like that. And generally they have about 60,000 19-year-olds, and they cream off the top 10,000. And it's actually very competitive because the young people in Norway want to join the military because it's seen as a very, very good employer. And they would spend, I think it's 1 or 2 years with the military. Women are becoming a significant part of the young people that are conscripted. There is, at the moment, we've got a Norwegian intern, and she's written a very nice piece, which you'll find on our website, which is talking precisely about the conscription of women into the Norwegian military. America, you can see, admitted women to all roles in the military in 2015, and the UK was a year later. And I think the reason why it was quite late for the UK was because they were concerned about long-term health problems that women might experience. but that obviously was resolved. Yes, in Italy, no women have been to the military until the year 2000, which is very late. I put this slide in because I thought, well, this is just to get the statistics around what's happening in the US. But you probably know this already, but it's 1.3 active duty military personnel. And out of those, it's 17.16% are women. But you've also got 18.52% female officers. Well, I have to say you're doing a lot better than the UK, because I think we're at something like about 10.5%, 11%, something like that. And it hasn't really moved in the last 10 years, from what I can see. Now, the second part of the slide is talking about the fact that the US is the first and the only country to pass a Women, Peace and Security Act. And it was President Trump that signed the document in 2017. It actually relates to what Ron was talking about, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which was passed in the year 2000, which basically says that it is the duty of, or rather is an onus on nation states to produce a national action plan, which is shortened to NAP, National Action Plan, NAP. And they really are very, very important, because a national action plan, country actually does it, they have to think, how are they going to meet the requirements of women, peace and security, which is basically shorthand for the Security Council Resolution 1325. Now, what the US has done is they passed this act, but the act actually says that every 4 years there has to be a submission of a strategy on women, peace and security. In other words, they call it a WPS strategy, but it's actually a national action plan equivalent of. And I've given the link there to, which is not very helpful, but anyway, that it's easy to find on the internet. There are 3 strategic objectives, which I've listed here. And the different departments, there's the Department of State, the USAID, and Department of Defense, really have to come together, plus any other government departments, to meet these 3 strategic objectives. Actually, what struck me was that it was very much outward looking and looking at partnership with other countries and states, nation states, to deliver on women, peace and security throughout the world. That was a very way of putting it. If I can just say that the National Action Plan for the UK is very much focused on 9 fragile countries, or countries that have just come out of conflict or in conflict. And they've divided it according to those 9 countries and how to tackle them. There is a section which is looking specifically at peacekeeping. The National Action Plan is due for renewal. A new one should be produced by the beginning of 2023, that is in the UK. As you can see, the US National Action Plan that they've come up with runs until 2023. I thought we should have a picture. And this is Jenny Boyd. Now I've just recently been to RAF Oldham, which is in Surrey in the UK. And the Squadron 27 fly the Chinook helicopters. They're the helicopters with the double rotors, and they're what they call the heavy lifting helicopters that can carry huge weights and lots of people. anyway, we went on a ride in one of those so I could experience it. And the back actually goes down, and if they're in a situation where they are actually in Mali at the moment, they can actually position a machine gun at the back of the helicopter. Anyway, Jenny is one of 30 pilots, and she does her stint in Mali as well. And they're part of the French contingent there. They're invited by the French, but they also service the UN mission that's based in Mali as well. So the global barriers to the security professions for women, there are many. Legal. What comes to mind when I say this is that the Philippines apparently only allow 10% of their military to be women. So they've actually put a ceiling on how many women can be part of their armed forces. And I'm sure there are many other countries. In China, for instance, there's a quota on how many women are allowed into their police academies. You might have read that. It was in the New York Times just recently. Physical, well, that's fairly obvious that women quite often cannot do all the physical stuff that men can do, and the training can be rather prohibitive for women, and at times they can drop out. Although I have to say that in endurance training, women tend to do better. They're, yes, over a long period of time, endurance-wise, they are very, very good, generally speaking. Education, well, it starts from right at the very beginning. At school, you know, there's boys' subjects and there's girls' subjects, and girls wear pink and boys wear blue. And, you know, we have to encourage girls to take more STEM subjects. And it's beginning to change, but it's, for instance, in cybersecurity, girls are still just a very small percentage of those that actually study it and go on to work in the area. And of course, there's the social norms and religious norms that prevent women from being part of security professions. And women themselves, let's face it, they might not want to actually work in the security sector. And for these reasons I've listed here. I like the proximity to men. Might not be very attractive. And of course, something that security women is looking at the moment, and it seems to be coming to a head, is sexual harassment and abuse within security institutions. Policing in the UK since the Sarah Everard case, it's just been one thing after another. Police, although it's probably only a tiny percentage, but they're getting very, very bad press in terms of the way they are treating women and their approach to women. And certainly, I think we can do better. I think the very nature of the type of organisations that policing are, it attracts probably people who are thinking about men who want to be in control. We need some more research around that, I think. Anyway, these sort of professions are not particularly attractive to women for all the reasons given there. So, separate and equal, can that be so? Well, as I say here, some people argue that all women's units are the only way to actually increase the percentage of women that are working in security. And certainly there is evidence from India, also I mentioned there Bahrain and Korea, that says in the more traditional societies this can work. And of course, we did have in peacekeeping, we had the all-female units, and they worked very well. But, and I have to say, I'm with the second lot that says that we're letting the, we're talking about policing here, male police officers off the hook. Yeah, and I think that I get impatient. I want to see everything working perfectly, but then maybe this is not, that having all women units is probably a stepping stone to seeing women as professionals in security. So what should the working environment for women be? Well, obviously, we want to see freedom from sexual harassment, abuse, and discrimination, and for women to be treated equally with respect. Apparently, they still, well, this is from the UK, but I'm sure it's in other countries as well, uniforms just don't fit. And also, women are expected to work in environments that really are not safe, not good, partly because it's just been designed for men and women are an afterthought. Big thing that we need to work out is the flexibility of working and you know, what time off, how the hours worked, and how, you know, if a woman is going to deploy on peacekeeping or wherever, how long should she go for? Can flexible working be made to work? And of course, part of that is the childcare provision. And I just wanted to mention Canada's initiative, which is, well, it's called the LC initiative. And there is an LC fund as well. And what they are doing is they're working specifically on what are the barriers to women's recruitment into security institutions and also into peacekeeping. So let's talk about peacekeeping. So at the moment, we've got 12 peacekeeping missions and approximately 90,000 peacekeepers. And UN Secretary General Guterres just recently was talking about the fact that so much money is spent on military, and particularly during the COVID pandemic, it was astonishing how military spending went up and health spending went down, even in the midst of a pandemic. I think it's quite astonishing that the annual budget of UN peacekeeping is less than 0.5% of global military spend. And you can see how the numbers of women in peacekeeping has crept up. So we've gone from 20 in all those years, from 1957 to 89. Today, we've got 6% of women in the military side of peacekeeping. That's, I'm talking about the troop peacekeeping. In policing, there are more women, 30%, nearly 30% individual police officers, and 15% of what they call the formed police units. Target is for those police units to be, those formed police units, 20%. And you can see that the individual police officers, they've almost reached their target. And a lot of it. So hopefully they will continue and make it 50%. So that would be good. It is amazing, though, to see that the target for military peacekeepers, the target for 2028, is only 15%, which means that 85% of military peacekeepers are still going to be male. But we just have to keep going. The Security Council Resolution 2538, which was agreed upon in 2020, is all about women in peacekeeping. And it's not very long, it's a good read. But basically, it paves the way to say to nation states, this is what you should be doing in terms of getting more women into peacekeeping. So I was very pleased to see that. And the interesting thing is it's not considered one of the Women, Peace and Security resolutions, because you will hear they talk about 1325, it's a Women, Peace and Security resolution, and the 9 subsequent resolutions. But this one is not considered one of those because it's about peacekeeping. And generally, the 1325 was more about protection of women and participation, but participation not in tradition, or not in the formalized military or policing, but participation in terms of mediation and conflict prevention and peace building at a local level.
Yeah, yeah. So much for that.
This is me with Major Senabu. She was the UN Female Peacekeeper of the Year in 2019, and I was very fortunate to be invited to be Master of Ceremonies for that event, which was held in the main General Assembly room, and that was in November 2019. And then, of course, we got COVID. And 2020, there wasn't a UN Female Peacekeeper of the Year. And then just recently, they just had a virtual event, and a Nepalese lady has got the title of Peacekeeper of the Year. So peacekeeping, I'm sure you know all this, but increased recruitment of women is critical for all of these reasons. So empowering women in the host community to be there for survivors of the gender-based violence, and being there for women who are in a society that are prohibited from speaking to men. So you can think of Afghanistan again. But also the presence of women peacekeepers helps reduce conflict and confrontation, improve support for local women. They act as role models, and they can create a greater sense of security to the local people. And they also, and what we've been talking about, is bring a diversity and an expansion of thought within a mission. Now, Cynthia Enloe is an academic, and I just really liked this quote from her book. Sorry, I'm nearly finishing, but I was just going to, no, I thought I had her name for the book. So if you read it, a less militarized military would be one less imbued with an institutional culture of masculinized violence. It would be a military less committed to a hierarchical, threat-filled worldview. Having an enemy wouldn't be so central to the military's raison d'etre. And I agree with her, absolutely. Perhaps we could discuss that in question and answers. I'm really coming to the end. I just wanted to mention we had a big conference in London in June 2019, women's participation in the security sector. And we had some great speakers from Mongolia, from Norway, Sweden, and we had a representative from the Met Police in London. And we also produced a video of a young girl, Palestinian girl, called Walla. And she became a police officer in the Palestinian security forces. If you go on the Security Women app, you'll be able to see that video. We had an event this year, virtual. This was part of the Commission on the Status of Women. Sorry about the sirens outside. Yes, we focused on peacekeeping. Peacekeeping, women leading in the field. So what future actions are we going to take? Well, we're going to continue doing further research. And if you have any ideas on what research we should be doing, certainly earlier today, I was talking to a lady who works in the Department of Peacekeeping in the police contingent. And she was very keen that we did more research because they had a meeting and they definitely want more research to be done. And we're going to have more conference events and more other events as well, to engage people in this. And globally, what do we want to do? Well, certainly we need to get support from politicians and from senior people within the institutions, and we need to make sure that recruitment is targeted and hopefully bring in quotas for women. Women are retained and promoted, and there is the right enabling environment for them to flourish and to gain promotion. Mentoring and professional association is also very important for women. And as I mentioned before, we need flexible working patterns and support for parental leave. And targets, keep the targets up. It's always useful to have those. Though the UK has missed its target for recruitment of women into the military, although its excuse is that it does outsource that recruitment. But it was supposed to have 15% intake and it only managed 11.2%. But we keep on trying to encourage them to up that percentage. And in many countries, we need to make sure that there are laws to protect women and to prevent discrimination and sexual harassment. And we need more role models, like Jenny Boyd, who's a pilot for the Chinook helicopter. And I apologize because you've probably lots of American examples of role models. Thank you for listening. And over to you.
Thank you, Juliet. Thank you for your insights about the role of women in security and also for the links between inequality and conflict. And we're going to open it up to questions now. If anybody has a question and can put it in the chat, we will read those out and have a dialogue. Or if you'd like to raise your hand, you can do that as well.
Yeah. Well, while we're waiting, I have a question myself, which I was wondering where there might be some examples of women in security where it's working the best. And if you might elaborate on that.
Well, I can think of some lovely examples, but they're individuals. But are you talking about which countries are actually encouraging more women into security?
Yeah. I think maybe you could maybe give an example of both.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, there's no country that is doing particularly wonderfully well, I have to say. And it's for a variety of reasons. When I think about the UK, I think that we've got, when you think about the military, it's got a certain culture, and that's not particularly attractive for women. The US, I would say that it's a different culture, and you also, I think you managed very successfully to deploy incentives for women to want to join. I think there are different reasons why women might want to join, say, the American military, as opposed to men wanting to join. Apparently, it's women want to have the opportunities to travel and for education. That seems to be a big plus point. Thinking about other countries like Norway, which was quite leading in terms of actually introducing conscription, because they had conscription anyway for men, but to introduce it for women as well, I think was quite an interesting move. But each country is unique, because certainly in Norway, I think the Nordic countries have the threat of Russia, and they're, in terms of there being some kind of conflict in their region, and so they have a more greater sense of wanting to protect their country. I think if you want to have individuals, I think the UN does a great job on highlighting individuals. And there was, what is her name? The lady who is the Peacekeeper of the Year, Police Peacekeeper of the Year this year, the Nepalese lady. There is a video on the UN Peacekeeping website, and it features her, and it is very inspiring. But if you go onto the Security Women website, you will see there are so many examples of inspiring women. And we have a lady who's working with us at the moment. She's from Rwanda, and she is working in private security, but she used to be a police officer in Kigali, and she deployed on a peacekeeping mission to South Sudan. And I think she's very impressive. And her story is on the Security Women app. Her name's Winnie, and yeah, you can look that up. Yeah, does that's have I given you enough examples?
All right, I'm seeing Ron has his hand up, and I believe you're unmuted, Ron. So why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Well, first a statement, and hopefully leading into a question. Listening to and talking to you in the past, and listening to this, I'm reminded very much of what we went through here in the U.S. Before I joined the United Nations. I was a human resource director for a couple of rather large Midwest cities, and in one of those, we were trying to integrate the firefighter units. We were trying to get more women into, get a gender balance, and it seems so a lot of the problems that you're listing that were there as well. One of the main ones being, well, firefighters have to be big, strong guys with strong upper body. They have to carry 200-pound hoses and so on. And so we started asking questions. Why do they have to carry 200-pound hoses? Because that's what the bundle is. Do these men carry them? No, they carry smaller bundles, like maybe 100 pounds or 25 pounds. If they had to carry 200 pounds, it would tire them out. Well, it's this circular reasoning, and it takes a while to break that down. But that same kind of reasoning applies in so many other things. Like women can fly helicopters as well or better than men. Women. If you're looking at a lot of what we do in peacekeeping is not so much firing weapons at people, but taking weapons away and dealing with issues in communities that don't involve direct kicking down doors and doing standard military kinds of things, but rather using more of a proactive approach and more of a conflict resolution approach. And quite frankly, women can do that a lot of times better as well, at least as well. And I'm wondering if you see the same kind of thing. I'm sure that you've seen other, like Norway. How did they get to the point they are? Israel, how did they get to the point they are? They must have faced these same kinds of issues and gone through them to some extent. And I'll stop talking, but
yeah, no, I love your story about the fire hose. I think that's great.
That one struck me. I couldn't stop laughing when they said that. I
have to say that quite often women have said to me that they have to be better than the men.
Yes.
There's such pressure on them. And also because in these security institutions, there are so few of them, the spotlight is on them. And they really can't afford. And almost like they say, oh, yes, well, for a man, they just have to be average, it has to be. But for them, they've got to be better than everybody. They've really got to prove themselves. And it's very wearing. And really, we need to get the numbers of women up just so that it actually creates, a better atmosphere and environment for women to, that they don't feel there is so much of a spotlight on them. But yes, I think actually nothing is perfect. They're because these institutions are so masculinized. I don't think there's any country. You talked about Israel. You just mentioned Israel. I don't think Israel is particularly good. I haven't done any research in Israel. I don't know, but there's so much talk at the moment about how these institutions have to change. If I tell you that in the UK we had a survey which was done, which was commissioned by the Defence Select Committee in Parliament on women in the military, in the armed forces. And they interviewed, I think, over 4,000 women, half of whom were currently they were part of the military, and the others were veterans. And the outpouring, it was extraordinary how they said, well, you know, we had to accept that that was the way things were.
Right, you don't.
and now it's reaching the stage where, no, we're actually going to try and change this. It is not acceptable.
Yes.
And I know that people talk about the bystander approach, don't they? They say you can't just walk past. If you see behavior that is not right, you don't walk past, you actually challenge it. And what astonishes me is, I think in the just recently they had a hearing, and the chief of staff of the military in the UK basically talked about laddish behaviour, and how basically they had to have laddish behaviour because it made the men ready for the battle, ready for war. And you think, what? I have to say, I was really pleased is that the Secretary of State for Defence in the UK disagreed with him. He said, no, that's nonsense.
Yeah.
So it's about changing the culture of these institutions as well. They can be professional, they can do the job, but you don't need that. And we've gone from crisis. We've got one at the moment is, I think it's the Yorkshire Cricket Club, but that's not about gender, that's about race. But, you know, again, it's this sort of laddish behaviour, and it just has to change.
Yeah, I think we have to go back to the fundamental part and say, what is required of peacekeepers? What is required of security? And it's not just the old ideas of carry an axe and be stronger than everybody else. I mean, so much of it now is just different requirements. And I think we need to really begin to look at those as well. And I think that's only going to come about as we get more and more gender balance, and the people that are in positions to make decisions and make policy and make procedure actually say, well, no, that old way isn't working. We need to do it this way. And as they're successful, it's going to work. And I think we're seeing that in successful police units, not just in the US, but around the world as well. Balanced units just are much more effective. Okay, yeah. I'm going to mute now because I don't want to.
I do have a question here from the chat. I have a question from Lori. Is peacekeeping offered as an option when US high school students, and maybe also other countries, are approached by military recruiters? Is there a certain branch of the US military that has a peacekeeping position?
Well, my understanding of that is no. In fact, it is really interesting. The research we're doing at the moment with the cadet units in the UK, a couple of the questions we're asking is about peacekeeping. And also the research we did in South Africa, which was with applicants to the armed forces in South Africa. And there are a couple of questions on peacekeeping there. And I have to tell you, more than half, well, no, but even more than that, the candidates didn't even know about peacekeeping. They didn't really understand what it was about. South Africa actually does, have peacekeeping contingents. They support the MONUSCO deployment in the DRC. But in the UK, I'm extremely frustrated because peacekeeping is not mentioned. It just doesn't feature, because it's all about military is about warfare, and it's a strange sort of mental situation that you've got to keep. It's about power, and you've got to project that power as a country. So to talk about peacekeeping, it's sort of that's something completely different. But I think actually I think we will end up talking more about peacekeeping, especially if organizations like the UNA and my organization, we talk about peacekeeping. We need to talk about it more and more and how important it is. I would like to have a situation where the purpose of militaries is not only to deal with domestic crises and whatever happens at home, but also that their purpose is peacekeeping.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Are you going to read it, Lisa? I see
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Bob.
Yes, we have a question from Terry Link. In the U.S. military, women are subjected to sexual assault, harassment, and abuse. Is this also a problem in other security organizations? And what can be done to address this?
Absolutely, Terry. It's a problem across the world in, I would say, in all militaries. And I mentioned, I thought it was actually coming to a head because we've had this survey, and it was actually in the UK, we've had a series of reports done. We've had a Risden report, we've had and basically it's all coming out with the same conclusion. It's unacceptable behavior. And I think that we're going to see some big changes. But because of the sensitivity of armed forces, I just sort of alluded to it, there's a secrecy around armed forces because it's about the country and the country's power and defense. And it's a criticism. So if you start talking about sexual harassment, abuse, and discrimination within the armed forces, it's a criticism of them and they don't like it. But certainly I can see, and I know in the US, you are tackling this whole thing about sexual abuse and harassment in the military. The only thing that I think would make a significant step forward in the change is that cases are actually tried in a civil court rather than in a military court behind closed doors. We need to open it up and it needs to be transparent.
Can I just add quickly that my experience was that I was in a couple of missions, or when I was very active in the UN, we had problems, particularly with I'll just go ahead and say it, with Brazilian, in this case it was Brazilian peacekeepers in Haiti and in Africa, and it was outright sexual abuse and that sort of thing. I'd like to be optimistic and say that education works, but I think one of the best things that works is when we send those troops home and refuse to pay for them, and the Brazilian government is stuck with a bill. And all of a sudden they begin to take notice. I mean, I hate to be that way, but you know, you got to grab people where they live and to get their attention sometimes. And that I think needs to be done vigorously and more of it. And I'm really pleased to see that we now have, was it 3? I think we have 3 force commanders that are female and
Yep.
2 or 3 deputy force commanders. Now the force commander is important because they control, they are the commanders of all of the military troops, no matter where they come from. If they come from the US, come from India, come from Brazil, in a mission, and they are very powerful people. And most of the ones that I've dealt with were actually quite good. But they need to be encouraged to take really strong stands on these things. And I can think of it in Sudan. We had a Indian force commander, and somehow he was able to. In a way, he had more authority when he was talking to a Pakistani troops than an American might have. So you need to use that broad approach that we have in the UN. And I'm glad to, anyway, I'm glad to see that we're getting more and more females in higher positions in the military, in the force commanding, because that's, I think, is going to be important.
No, I agree. I think that is really important. But you're right. The peacekeepers have had a bad press in terms of sexual exploitation and abuse. And certainly the South Africans in the DRC. I think there was a lot of shame. And I know that when they went back to South Africa, they had they're a bit slow in getting things going, but they have actually gone through it, a review, and it basically shamed the whole nation because it was publicized. But I think it's probably, you talk about monetary, to take away the pay.
Yes.
I think that would be very good. I mean, the problem is that the UN is almost stymied because they're made up of several nations, that they almost said, right, okay, you've got to go home, and your country has to deal with those people who have perpetrated. And it sometimes just doesn't happen, does it? I mean, if say, sexual exploitation, abuse, oh well, that was just natural, wasn't it? Really, these women were just throwing themselves at the peacekeepers. They couldn't help it, could they? Really. But I have to say that there's now been such a lot of research, publicity around this whole issue that I'm pleased to say that it has got better. It had to get better, but it has got better. Zero tolerance approach has worked.
I have another question from Dave Wiley. You mentioned increasingly depending on defense intelligence for protection of women. Given the increasing active warfare that US defense intelligence and CIA has going in active warfare, example, Somalia, how do they contribute to the protection of women and civil society? I guess given the negative aspects of that, how does it protect women?
Yeah, if I may just add to that, what we find is that the CIA is increasingly in charge of kinetic drone warfare across the Sahel and Africa, and we're involved in the drone attack on the family at near the Kabul airport that were mistakenly identified as potential terrorists. But worse than that, in Somalia, where we had a chance to have a settlement with the Islamic courts movement, it was the CIA that made its own separate judgment to go in and to fund the warlords with satchels full of US cash to start the warfare against the Islamic movement that 75% of the Somalians supported as a source of peace and an ending of conflict. So my question is, this, by the way, this kinetic warfare role of the Defense Intelligence Agency and CIA in the US is what led all of the major African studies centers in the United States and the African Studies Association to boycott cooperation with the DIA and the CIA because of their being untrustworthy and making very bad decisions about protecting women, children, and civil society in the places that they were operating.
Yes. Well, I could agree. I mean, it was just appalling, wasn't it? How they got the intelligence wrong when they bombed the poor family in Afghanistan. It was, and well, I think what I was referring to when I talked about defense intelligence is that we now have a situation where I think terrorism is a threat to most countries, actually. And that's where you need to have intelligence. In terms of defense intelligence in places like Mali, I think it's, it's necessary. But I mean, if you don't have intelligence, you've got to actually know what's going on. And if you have women that are part of that defense team, defense intelligence team, then you stand a better chance of actually getting it right. And if you talk about, protecting women and children, then yes, I would say you definitely need women as part of the intelligence, because you need the women are a good source of what's actually happening on the ground. And sometimes you need women to talk to women and find out what that is.
But in the drone warfare, which is their major force now alongside of Special Command, the drones are very indiscriminate about who they are hitting, and we've lost a lot of women and children in Somalia, elsewhere in Niger and in Mali as well from the use of drones rather than in troops, and rather than spending the money on education and job making and peacemaking, which leads then to the trainees of the US military. Two different of their officers have pulled off 2 coups in Mali, as you probably know, with the result of our intelligence and training of the Malian military.
I mean, what you're talking about is is remote warfare, in effect, that because it's remote, it's easier because you're not there. Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen there was a film called Eye in the Sky, and that was about the use of a drone. Actually, the film goes through the agonies of actually deciding whether or not to use the drone, and it's very, very difficult. But maybe, I mean, this is maybe an argument or a discussion you can have another day to talk specifically about the use of drones. And I know that a lot of my colleagues are very concerned about the use of robots.
Yes.
So yeah, technology is moving on, and the problem is that you got in your mindset that's the enemy. The collateral damage, it's less important because you're not actually there. You can't actually, you see it.
Right. Thank you.
I have another question from Tom. Before the fall of the Afghani government, there were many women recruited into the national police force there. Do you think that will be a determining factor in the future of the Taliban-run government in that country?
Oh, do you know, it was interesting because I asked the question after the Afghanistan had fallen to the Taliban. I remember going to, I can't remember what the meeting was now, but I remember asking, what has happened to all those female police officers that were actually trained? And I never got an answer, but I expect they just went home and they tried to escape Afghanistan because I would have thought they would have been targeted even more. The very fact that they were women daring to do that sort of job, prime target, because before the Taliban actually took over, there was a lot of violence in Afghanistan. There were a lot of attacks on prominent women. I remember that more than one prominent female judge got blown up by a suicide bomber or a bomb. IED or whatever. The very nature of Taliban, we have yet to see what's going to happen, but the whole sort of basis of what the Taliban represent, what their values are, they do not, and I just cannot see female police officers whilst the Taliban are in control. Sorry to say that.
Just quickly, you mentioned something that I think is very, you talk about robots and the new technology that's coming on in the military world. That's sort of a two-edged sword because for one thing, it makes it easier for gender balance because quite frankly, a lot of the technicians, the engineers and so on that we see coming through school now are female. So there will be more of a balance in that area. But the point is it still remains, it still has that military edge. It still has that killer edge. And the United States has done a lot, but maybe it's my UN background, but this is not particularly the place to look for the ultimate solution. The solution is going to come from around the world, and the US is going to lose on a number of these issues. And it's going to have to change radically. So just a couple things that struck me there.
Thank you, Ron.
Well, I have a question from Lori. Are there many women trainers of peacekeepers helping male peacekeepers to be better listeners and more empathetic?
Oh, what a lovely question. Gosh, I have to confess, I really don't know. I have met one or two women who train peacekeepers, and they've been very good. But in terms of numbers, I'm not sure what percentage of trainers are women. But I do know that peacekeepers have to go through a gender training. And I remember I decided once that it was just a sort of one-off, and that it should be a sort of ongoing. So every so often they should have to go through that training again, so that they don't forget about what they're about. Yeah, and so yes, the certainly UN peacekeeping department is absolutely committed to making sure that the training is there. But of course, one would say it's been a bit haphazard, because some countries pre-deployment, they don't actually bother to go through the training that they should do. Other countries are better, but then you find that others just skimp on it. And then of course it's all about attitude, isn't it? You know, how important do they think that sort of training is?
Training, from my experience, training in general, no matter whether it's security, whether it's finance, whatever it is, training in peacekeeping operations was dismal. It was really horrible. The whole idea was that we hire you and we pay you a good salary because you're supposed to know this stuff already when you come in. And so we shouldn't have to train you. We just throw you in the field and away you go. Well, obviously that doesn't work. And I think that was one of the issues that finally that got to me in the UN, finally made me leave the UN, was you're going nowhere. You're not training. You're not doing anything. You're not really changing. I think that attitude is getting better, but definitely it's one of the problems is the UN is not just that the militaries aren't training in Pakistan or India or whatever, but that the UN isn't doing enough when they come in, and we need to really increase what's being done, not just to allow females in, but to allow males to, to realize that they need this. Anyway, it's so training is an area that the UN hasn't been particularly good on in the past.
I would ask one question in regards to that. Do you think that the minimum, kind of the limited budget that the UN has, does that affect that? Either Juliet or Ron?
Yes, I just think it probably does, because it's such a tight budget that they have. I think it's very, very difficult. Yeah. I was just going to mention, in terms of what Ron was just saying, that on the 7th and 8th of December, there is going to be a ministerial, what they call a ministerial meeting for peacekeeping in Seoul, in Korea. And in the run-up to this ministerial, there have been a whole series of preparatory meetings with various countries coming together. It's all available on the website, but it's quite impressive that it's all about how can we improve UN peacekeeping? How can we improve the performance, the effectiveness? And so they're looking into it. I think the overriding topic is about technology, and I think it was also looking, because of COVID, looking at health provision as well. And but certainly the Women, Peace and Security agenda is going to be carried over at that meeting, and there's going to be a specific event on that.
Lynn, you have a question before we finish?
Yes, thank you so much, Juliet. But we have several organizations represented here, and of course, a number of amazing individuals. Is there a way that we could be involved with Security Women?
Yes, absolutely, Lynn. If organizations, if they would like to work with Security Women, or we could find a way of working together, I would certainly welcome that. And just get in touch with me, send me an email, and you've got my email address, and I'd be very happy. Yes, I welcome it. I think if we can be more powerful, the more we work together on these things.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we're going to finish the Q&A. I just want to give a big thank you to you, Juliet, for this evening, for all the work you're doing on a daily basis with your organization and for bringing this information and insight to our group tonight and spending your time with us. I'm going to pull up the slide, have Hakan pull up a slide that has information about the 16, well, what are my days?
16 days of activism.
Hakan, can you bring up that PowerPoint so people can have that? And I'm going to put the link in the chat, I think. We are going to have this information also sent out to the organization. It'll be on our website and sent out in an e-blast. And I'm hoping he can, let me see if I can get it to the chat as well, as that is another way to follow up and support. Oops, I got the wrong thing. Okay.
So Lisa, could I say one word about the peacekeeping campaign?
Okay.
As many of you know, on October 25th, the day after the UN Day celebration we had at MSU, at the Kellogg Center, we had a campaign of call-in for across Michigan to try to get the representatives of the state of Michigan in the US Congress to support House Representatives motion HR 4420, which is a UN peacekeeping resolution to get the US to pay our $1 billion of past dues that are hindering UN peacekeeping from operating because of the lack of funding, and to pay our dues regularly in full and on time. And I've just had a report from the UNA headquarters today that no Michigan representatives have stepped forward to become a co-sponsor as we were asking. Not even our own representative, Alyssa Slotkin, who actually wrote to us that she's quite supportive of UN peacekeeping, but she still has not stepped forward to become a co-sponsor of that important resolution. So I just want to say, for those of you who did do a call in or an email in that day, the need is still there. Do it again and keep after her, and as I plan to do myself.
Thank you. This is the information. I put the link in the chat for the 16 days of activism, and then we will send that out as well. And then Hakan, the next slide is a thank you to our co-sponsors for this evening, who are listed here: Peace Education Center, Lattice, MSU African Studies Center, Zonta District 15, and Zonta Club of Michigan Capital Area. We appreciate their co-sponsoring. And the last thing we have before we do a final thank you for our speaker is information about our local chapter of the United Nations with our website, and an opportunity to join if you would like to participate more and have more activities like this to be able to attend. And if we can bring up the full screen again, Hakan would take the PowerPoint down. We can maybe unmute everybody, and we can all give a big thank you to Juliet. We really appreciate all that you were able to provide us with in the information, insights, and hope that we can do more to connect with your organization, which is doing such wonderful work.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you,
really
everybody.
Appreciated it.
Thank you, Julia.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Thanks so much.
Hey.
Yep. Okay. I guess we're done.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lynn.
Good to see you.
Bye. Yes.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Juliet. Have a good evening.
Good night.
How long? Have a good trip to New York.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Will you be there a while?
Till the 18th of December.
Oh, wow.
So I am here for a while. In fact, I'm going into the UN tomorrow. I've actually got a ticket, well, I say ticket, to go to the